Welcome to this video on what should have been a real simple, straightforward task of putting the picture frame around this deck. And started out pretty well. I've done finish work, actually a lot of finish work in this house in particular, so I'm no stranger to fitting things and should have gone like clockwork. And actually the start of it, getting the boards cut and to the right size and leaving the right gaps, went pretty well, but this thing went off the rails with the fasteners I used. So stick around and see what happened and how I ended up having to correct the problem to get this picture frame around the deck. So come along, let's get started. Well, here we are on another October morning, but it's starting to feel a little more like October. It's 46 degrees. The sun is out nice now. It is a clear day, but it's pretty breezy. And I sure am glad I got this taped up yesterday because it is full of condensation. That wood would be really wet today to try to work with. I've got to brush this water off of here so this thing dries off a little bit. And I'm going to have to start a little bit later today on this decking, and I think I'm going to have to take advantage of the warmer part of the day over the next couple of days to get this decking done, because you have to be very concerned with the expansion and contraction on this decking material. And you have to get the gaps. There's a chart that tells you at the temperature you're installing it against the high temperatures you expect in the summertime for this deck, and what you need to leave for gaps. So I'd like to minimize the difference there as much as I can. Wait for that material to warm up. It's sitting in the sun right now, and go at this a little bit later today. So as you get into the fall season and a little bit later in the year when it's cold, you have to start making a lot more considerations when you're doing decking with composite decking. It's not warming up very fast today, and this material is covered with water too from the condensation. I wiped the deck down, that's drying off nicely. I think it's going to be a little bit before I start working with the boards. It's a little overcast today, and that breeze is cold. But we have to keep moving ahead. But I can at least get this stuff out of here now. And from this point forward, I'm probably going to have to cover everything up with a tarp at night with some weights on it, because I'm not going to get this plastic back on. So let's get this stuff off of here and see what we have. And we almost have this off. At least being decking material, it doesn't hurt it to be outside. Get that water off of here with that plastic. Wind's going to help me. And there's my installation guide, which I've already read online. And there it is. Let's cut the bands. Take a look at what we've got. Well, I see already I don't like the way the cladding for the sides of the deck was stored. The way it was set on the pallet and stacked, it's bowed, so I'm going to have to lay that somehow to flatten itself out. Yeah, these are cupped a little bit. I'll have to lay them out on the deck to straighten out. What I really need to get to those are not light. And they'll all have to be ripped down to size. They come 12 inches wide. I only need about 7 1/4 inches to go over that joist. I got plenty of material. For some reason, when they put the order together, they assumed that I was going to clad the side up against the house like it was a free floating deck. This one's cupped really bad. That should be fun to handle through the table saw. Pick this up before it gets wet. And this is what I was after. These have got to go on first. This will be the framing board. So I'll get those over to the deck where I can lay them out across the joist to warm up in the sun a little bit. And then we'll start measuring and cutting. And there we have the last one. And the sun is starting to swing around. These are a little damp. So we'll let them sit here over the joist where they get some airflow around them. And now I'll get some sun on there, get them warmed up a little bit, make it a little easier to work with. And we're going to start on the sides. These things are about 16 feet long. So I'm going to have to do a splice in the middle on the front. Since I've got an 8-foot wide deck, it'll be about a roughly half a board each on the ends. Fortunately, the boards that I'm going to use for the picture framing on the edges appear to be very straight. So I can go ahead and start measuring, marking the 45 and cutting, and at least get those picture frame boards in on the outside today. Now comes the part that, well, frankly, I just don't like doing, and that's making sure I get these cuts exact. Now, I am going to make an exact 45-degree cut on these boards because this deck is primarily square. You know, working off from the posts, we checked it, it's square, but you do have variation in the lumber. I see I've got a little bit of cupping here on this board, so it kicks out a little bit. I can't do much about that, so I'm just going to work off from this corner and know where my 45-degree is and mark it on here so that I can get the length I need to cut this board from the true 45 back to where it goes up against the house. Now these boards measure 5 1/8 inch. I want 1 inch overhang. I'm going to put a 1/2 inch thick piece of cladding on here, and I want a 1/2 inch of that board to hang over that cladding for a little bit of a lip. So I marked on the square 4 1/8 inches, and I'm going to take this white marker on this black stuff, and I'm going to get marks on here that are 4 1/8 from the edge. Now, normally on a piece of wood, I would just drag this along and mark a straight line, but I keep getting hung up on this tape because the tape overlaps the edge a little bit. So that gives me a point to check from. And I already used this, but I didn't mark it in white. So I've got this to give me a rough idea of where the 45 will end up based on the corner up here. And I'm going to mark that with white. Now I have an intersection point for that part of the 45. I can't really get a measurement out here. So that's where I'm going to base my measurements to cut the board. I take my tape, I run back to the house. I'm putting it flush against the house, although I'm going to hold it back about 1/4 inch for expansion. I get 91 7/8 inches to the outside edge. You probably can't see that, 91 7/8 inches to where those two lines intersect. So that's what I am going to use. I'm going to take 91 7/8. I got to write that down somewhere so I don't forget. And then I am going to subtract 1 inch. So I have to cut this 90 7/8 of an inch to this point with a 45 on out. And then I should have a good 45 on this end. I'll get that clamped down, and then I will do the other end, and then we will try to fit this board going down the front of the deck. Okay, I've written down the dimension, the measurement of 91 7/8 on a slip of paper. I'm just going to double check that. Following the old rule, measure twice, cut once. I'm going to put the tape right up against the house. Get in line here so I don't have variation from the angle. 91 7/8. So now what I had to do was go in and check the chart for temperature variation to tell me how much I need to leave off for expansion. It's about 60 degrees right now, but the boards are just a little warmer than that because the sun has been on them. And I'm figuring it for a max of 100-degree high. Now, absolute temperatures, occasionally it gets in the 90s around here, but there's a period of time in the summer when these won't be shaded, and I'm just going to use 100 degrees when the sun hits them. So with that, I went to the chart, and you need to allow 1/8 of an inch for every 16 feet of board on the ends for expansion. Well, this little section of board is about 8 feet, so I cut that in half, which gives me about a 1/16 inch gap allowance on the end of the board with the temperature what it is now. So I take 91 7/8 less a 1/16 at each end, which comes to 91 7/8 less an 1/8. So I've got to cut from the start of this angle at about 91 3/4 inches. So I'll go get that measured up on one of these and get the 45 cut. I brought down the trim boards and set them on here. I can work from here kind of like a sawhorse. I got the 2 end boards cut and in position. And I'm going to use one of the cutoff boards on the end down here. Made it up because I'm going to have at least one butt joint. That'll put the butt joint further down here. And then out of these remaining 2, I'm going to cut one more board to fit this gap here from the corner to where this butt joint is, and then I'm going to secure them. However, as I've said many times, you can never have too many clamps. I need the long clamps, and I don't have enough to clamp all of these edge boards in place as I fit the corners and try to screw them in. So it's a trip to the building center again, and we'll pick this up again tomorrow. Starting to lose my sun over here with the shade, and it's getting a little cool this afternoon. Well, here we are in another unbelievable October day, but you might say it's just a bit windy out here today. The windmills are spinning like crazy, but the temperature, it was 50 degrees when I got up at 4, and it is now 60 degrees at about 8:30. Time to get out here and get back at this from where we left off yesterday. First thing we're going to do today is clean up this first miter cut I made yesterday. These pieces for the framing are very long and wasn't able to get it onto the miter saw to make my cut, so I marked it and tried to do the cut with a hand saw, the circular saw, and oftentimes I struggle with that. I clamped a guide on here, and that was my mistake. I should have just gone with it and cut it freehand because I do a lot of that, and it always seems to work out. And the second one I cut went right along the line, and it worked great. So today I've got it up here on the miter, clamped in, set to 45, and I'm just going to clean up that cut because it got a little wide in one spot, and we'll be in perfect shape when we take it back down. Okay, I've got the piece lined up, clamped in tight. Double check my angle. I can go just a little bit more here to clean this up. Because I need expansion space anyway on the ends, and that flat end goes up against the house between the two different pieces of flashing. I've got more than enough to play with here to take just a little bit off of this end. And there we have it. A good, clean, 45-degree miter joint. All right, so far, so good. Recut that joint on this piece, clamped it in with a 1-inch space, with a 1-inch overhang along the side. So this is roughly where it needs to be. The end is lined up with my line over here. And the other piece with the good cut from yesterday is sitting here. And I want to work from this piece over to this end. But I was suspicious about this factory cut right here and checking it. Sure enough, it's not square. You would think coming out of the factory, a manufactured product like that, the ends would be square. So I'm going to have to take this up to the miter saw and make sure that end is square, because I'm going to measure off from this to get my board for this end before I cut my miter down here. We need to be pretty exact for this thing to come out, because this has to be perfectly straight along here before I start setting and laying in the deck boards, because I can't get off one way or the other on this amount of space before I get to that side. So we got to get adjusted. And also for tapping these around to make sure they're where I want them, I use a rubber mallet. Then I don't have to have a piece of 2x4 with a regular hammer to make sure I don't dent this. It's a pretty handy thing to have around. The other thing you'll notice is yesterday late we ran and got a bunch of fairly inexpensive long clamps. I typically, for most work, use these Irwin clamps. They are very good, sturdy clamps, easy to work with. Never been a big fan of the less expensive ones, but for the purposes of what I've got here today to clamp these boards in place, as I measure and before I start to screw them down, they're going to work just fine rather than invest a lot of money in more Irwin clamps. Let's get this board up, get that end straightened up, get it clamped in place, and get the measurement for that last board. I decided that since this deck's going to be here a long time and I've got to live with it, I'm going to take a little extra precaution on cutting this board. I know what I need for length, and what I did was I put a straight cut about 1 inch beyond what I need, and I'll cut that with a skill saw. That'll give me a manageable length of board to take up and then do the finish cuts up on the big miter saw. Then I know I'm going to get a good, clean 45-degree cut on this board, because this is a money board here. I've only got one left. With that, let's get it cut. Well, that should have done the trick. Looks like we got a clean cut, but we'll clean her up on the miter saw. Something else to remember when you're cutting material like this, or you're even cutting wood, you want to flip it over so the finished side is on the bottom, so the teeth cut up into it so you don't tear up the edge. If you flip this over and have the teeth pull up, they'll pull on that coating that's on this deck board, and you'll have a ragged edge. Sometimes also you have to fabricate your own equipment. So I didn't have a stand, believe it or not, matches the height of the ends on this miter saw as many years as I've had it. So I took one of the tall sawhorses and clamped a piece of plywood onto it at the height I need to match this, and that really helps manage these longer boards. I have everything cut, aligned, clamped in place. So we took our double check measurements, and the diagonals are equal, so I am square. I am the same distance from the house here and there, and we are an even distance along this board. and from that end to that end, which stands to reason since it was square. And then we double checked our alignment here to make sure I'm perfectly straight by holding a string from one end to the other across here, and we're all lined up because we have to have a straight edge here when we start out with our clips putting those deck boards down. So with that, everything clamped in place, the next step is I've got to secure these borders to the framing, and what I'm going to do first is just take my Sharpie, and I need to be at least 3/4 of an inch in from the side of the board per the manufacturer to prevent any damage. Well, I've marked it 7/8 of an inch in, and I just laid the ruler out, and since along the framing I'm only going to be able to go every 16 inches, I'm going to go every 16 inches here on this, and I'll be hitting a joist. So what I've done is mark 7/8 of an inch, and when I get to the 16 mark, I just put a dot with my Sharpie. 32, 48, 64, and 80. And then when I get down here, I'm just going to stay close to the edge, and I'll put these in to tie that corner down. And then on this side, I know that I've got an inch gap here to allow for that face board that's going to be going on in a little bit. And I got to go in another 3/4 of an inch from there to pick up the center of that outside joist. So we go an inch plus 3/4, set our marker, and go right down the line again at the 16-inch mark. 32, and so forth. I'm going to work my way around doing that same thing. Over here I'm going to do it for each of the joists, and then mark that end the same as I did this. Once that's done, I'm going to come along, I'm going to drill these with the size drill bit recommended by the manufacturer for the matching screws, and we're going to screw this down. Step is to drill pilot holes for these composite cladding screws that are sold along with this decking material. They have heads that match the decking that I'm putting on. And what you're supposed to do, and I double checked this, is drill a 3/16 diameter pilot hole for each one so you don't damage this. And they drop down into that hole, but don't drill into the substrate because we're into what you're mounting to, because you won't grip. You just want to drill a pilot hole in the top. And to make that easy to do, what I've done, and I do this often for a depth gauge, I found my 1-inch depth, which is the thickness of that board, and I just marked it with a piece of electrical tape. I go right down to where I contact the electrical tape, and I know that my hole is drilled deep enough. And with that, let's drill a hole. Try to make this as straight as possible. There you go. Right down to the tape. Drill the other one. Right down to the tape. It's just that easy. So I will go around the boards now and get these drilled. By the way, I'm using a top end cobalt bit. No sense fooling around with the cheap oxide bits or anything like that. It just doesn't pay. This material is kind of hard, and this bit should work well drilling all these holes. So I'll get this all done, and then we'll come back and start putting the screws in. I've decided to use my drill where I can control the torque a little better to drive these screws in. If I use my small impact, I don't have that control, and I'd probably drive these things right through to the center of the earth. So I've tried a couple screws and found the torque setting I need to just set those in. And that's how we're going to put these in, with a T20 driver bit. And it puts it right down where it needs to be. Actually, I'm going to back it off one click. Perfect. So I am going to work my way around and put all those screws in. We can pull those clamps. Then I have actually four more holes to drill at the joint over there where that board is overlapping the two boards with the clamp, and we will be secured. Well, securing this picture frame border did not go as planned. I started out using the screws that they suggested I use, and in a lot of places it just would not grab and pull down. It would start to spin and I couldn't pull the board down. They're just not long enough. You take up an inch of that screw and you don't have much thread left when you get down into what you're securing it to. So I did the bulk of them with just plain old deck screws that match pretty well. Those grabbed and pulled it right down. So I have the picture frame secured with these. But I think these cladding screws are probably fine for the side cladding because that's only a 1/2 inch thick. I had to move ahead and get this secured, so I used these. I knew they would work, and it looks like any other deck installation. And you notice too that it's starting to get shady over here. It's about 2:30 in the afternoon, and the sun is gradually moving to the west, to the southwest, and pretty soon it's going to be shady and it's going to start getting cool over here. So see how much more I can get done today. That's the problem with working late into the fall. You start running out of time at the end of the day. I couldn't work on the cladding this afternoon because my assistant I need to help me hold the board up while I run it through the table saw to rip it down to the right width was busy freezing apples today. So that'll have to wait. It's another beautiful, warm, but very windy day in October. I've been working on this for a while. This morning, got out here while it was still shady. And here's the problem. I had extra material for the picture frame boards, so I cut new ones because those standard deck screws down from the top look terrible. So I took them off. I cut brand new boards from the new material. Couldn't take it back anyway, and I don't need it sitting around in the shed. Special order stuff, you buy it, it's yours. So I've got that cut, lined up with the gaps set, everything squared up. I'm not going to secure these till I get some longer screws because these screws that they provided simply do not do it. There's not enough depth. And I asked at the time, are you sure that that's going to be long enough for a 1-inch board to secure it to the framing? And they said, oh yeah, that's what you use. So I had to go and buy another manufacturer's brand of screw, which is 2.5 inches long. So I knew I could get down and secure these boards. So let's give it a try and see if that makes the difference. I've drilled 2 pilot holes to make sure I hit the header and one of the joists. I got T20 driver bit and the impact. Let's see how it works. That one's flush. That one's flush, secure, perfect. That's the key. You gotta get them long enough. I'm ready to start cutting ends and securing boards as soon as I get this mess taken care of. Last night when I set the gaps on these boards, it was pretty cool outside. There wasn't a lot of heat from the sun, and that gap was wide enough you could almost drive a truck through it. Well, now today, with the temperatures we have, and they're in the low 60s right now, but with the sun shining on these, that gap is closing right up. Because if we look at the thermometer here, the temperature of the boards is between 100 and 105 degrees, even though the air temperature is much lower. So I have to go by that when I'm deciding what kind of a gap to leave on the end. See right here, I had this corner set fairly tight yesterday when the boards were warm, and just overnight with the cooler temps, that gap is opened up. That's why the gap you leave on the ends here is very important. Well, that was a pretty involved video for a real simple job, putting this picture frame on. I hope by watching it you've learned a couple of things, what to avoid and what to look for when you're doing this. So if you do a job like this, it goes easily for you and it turns out great. So thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please click like and consider subscribing to our channel. Let us know in the comments what you thought, what you'd like to see different in the future, and until next time, take care and enjoy your projects.